Okay, so welcome to this session on mastering paths in Creative Suite 5. Now, paths are a notoriously tricky thing to get used to working with, and we're going to focus on this with the pen tool. Because if you can master the pen tool, you can pretty much master anything when it comes to working with paths. And we're going to look at a range of different areas. We're going to look at controlling the paths and the handles for a path so that you can draw pretty much any shape you like. And then we're going to have a look at some workflow where you can work with some of the common problems with paths, like what to do when the path closes on you midway through working on, how to reopen it, carry on working so that you create one single path rather than end up with two or three different sections, which causes all kinds of problems. So I'm going to start off with by having a look at the pen tool and really trying to master some of the controls with the pen tool. Just give you some strategies to make your life that little bit easier, hopefully. Now, we're going to start off with a little unusual step. We're going to start off by drawing a rectangle on the screen. It could be a rectangle or a square, it doesn't matter, you just need a shape, basically. A rectangle will do absolutely fine. Now, with the shape selected, like this, I'm going to go up to the menus at the top here, and I'm going to go into the Object menu, and in there you'll see that there's a section called Path, and in amongst here there's the option called Split into Grid. Now if I click on this, it then comes up with a little box asking me how many rows and columns, etc. do I want. And if I hit Preview, it'll give me an idea of what this actually looks like. Now I'm going to set this up with a certain number, maybe put something like 6 by 6. And you'll see what it does is it gives us nice little equal spaces here, these little shapes, little squares. They've got gaps between them. I don't want any gaps, so I'm just going to set the two gutter values to 0 and 0. And then click OK. And you'll see there that it creates this nice little grid pattern here. Now this obviously then is lots of, these are little paths. This is not what I want to work with right now. I don't want these to stay paths. I want to turn this into a series of guides. And you'll see when we're working with the paths, the pen tool, the way we're going to, this will make life a lot easier for us. And it's a bit faster than trying to use the ruler tool and set grids up in a specific size and distance and make sure that they're all nice and even, etc. Okay, so to turn this selected path with all its little sections into a guide, I'm going to go up to the View menu, still with it selected. I'm going to go up to the View menu and go down to where it says Guides, and you'll see the option that says Make Guides. If I click on that, then instantly that turns into a series of guides, and that's what we're looking for. Okay, so if we're going to use a pen tool, I'd better pick the pen tool up. And before I go any further with it, I'm just going to set the pen tool up with some colour and a stroke size to make it a little bit easier for you to see what's going on. So I'll just invert the fill and stroke. I don't like to use a fill colour for this because I always find it's always trying to fill in behind me as I go, and it just I find that a bit irritating. So I'll leave that as completely transparent, and the stroke size, I'll push that up just a little bit to about 3 points, so it makes life easier for us to see what's going on. Okay, so I'll make my first first anchor point. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this into an anchor point that has handles. So it starts a curve. And I'm going to create this sort of S-curve shape that will have these nice little curves that are exactly the same distance apart, and they're even and symmetrical, which is not the easiest thing to do if you're just trying it for the first time. So I'm going to take, using my grid as a reference, I'm going to put my anchor point with my pen tool right on that little anchor there on the grid. And I'm going to click and drag with the pen tool to create these handles. And you see they're there, getting these little Bezier handles appear. Now I'm going to drag them all the way down until it meets the next guide. See there, it gives me a nice place to work with. And I also want them to be exactly straight up and down. I don't want them to be slightly off at an angle, which is not that hard to do, but one thing that you'll find makes life a bit easier is if you press and hold the Shift key as you do that. Keep your finger on the Shift key, and when you release the mouse, that's your first set of handles with an anchor point. Now if I move over to the next little crossroads on this grid, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag in the opposite direction, but at the same angle and for the same distance. That's the important part. Same angle, same distance. And again, I can hold shift to make sure that that stays nice and round. Got the next one. Again, I've got my finger on shift and I click and I drag down. Same distance. And I can go on all day. I won't, but I could go on all day making these nice little curves that are exactly the size and shape and symmetry of the previous curve and the one before, and so on and so forth. So that makes life nice and straightforward. Now the whole principle there is, as I say, that the angle of the curve, of the handle, and the distance I've travelled with the handle was the same, and that's how I got that uniformity. Now the next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to, instead of doing this S curve shape that you can see, I'm going to start turning this into more of a W shape, or possibly an M shape, depends on where your last curve was working. Now the trick with this is got to do with this handle that you can see here that I've just drawn, and it's this part here, this, if you like, the trailing part, the part that leads away from the curve that I've just created. That's the important part for this next section. Whenever you draw a handle or you draw a curved path and you get the handles, the direction you pull the handle has two parts. Obviously, there's the direction you pull and the direction away from where you pull. And the tailing end actually has nothing to do with the handle or the curve that you just created. It's more to do with the next curve. So on this path, because this handle goes up, the next curve I make will automatically start to go up because of the direction of that handle. If I want it instead to go down to create that W shape, then I have to change the direction of this handle. I have to get this to move from here down to here. And the way I can do that is by pressing and holding the Alt key. Now when I press the Alt key, when you have the pen tool in your hand, when pen tool is what you're working with, then it changes into this Convert Anchor Point tool, which if you've ever used that before, you'll know it's for turning anchor points you've made before into curves or back into corner points. But it can also be used to adjust the handles. Now if I bring that tool up to the handle, grab hold of it and swing it round, I can place it anywhere I like, and see how it's not having an influence on the curve that was there already. Now I'm going to bring it down and put it over the top of the handle that was already down there. So they're both in exactly the same position. Now when I let go of the Alt key, it immediately takes me back to the pen tool, which means that I'm still working in this path mode. I'm still ready to make a new path. And if I click and drag up again, you'll see there that instead of the curve going up at first, it now comes down, and I can continue to do the same thing. Move that one and go here and pull up, and you get that completely different effect. Now I'm not saying that's the shape you need to create, but the point is that that allows you to do whatever it is you want to do with the curve that you're working on. You can control them that little bit easier. Now for the next little trick, we're going to start to get this curve to turn round the corner. And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this handle here and press Alt again. Now it's important, I should point out as well, that I'm not actually putting the pen tool down at any stage. I'm pressing Alt to change the tool temporarily into the Convert Anchor Point tool. If I was to go back to the Tools palette and change it to the Convert Anchor Point tool then effectively I'd be closing the path by changing the tool, and I'd have to come back and I could modify the handles I'd made already, but I wouldn't really have the option to make a new handle further round. So it's much easier just to use those keyboard shortcuts, pressing Alt like that. Okay, so I'm going to take this next handle here, or the previous handle rather, And this time when I press Alt, rather than drag it all the way around, I'm going to drag it over here to around about to the 3 o'clock position. And then I'm going to come down to this point here where I'm going to draw the next handle. And I'm going to drag that to the same width at the same direction. And you see there that it starts me turning the corner. And of course I could then take this handle, pull it over to match the same position as its pal, and then carry on making more handles that do the same. And the whole trick of the workflow is I continually keep pressing Alt and just changing the position of that tailing handle so that it goes where I want it to go next. Could of course then bring that up to here, so it's back up to the 12 o'clock position, and I'm going to go here. I can start to make them come back again. Okay, now I don't know what it is I'm actually drawing there. I don't think it's any kind of actual proper shape, but it's not so much what's being drawn as the control that you have over the paths that's the important part. Now, the other thing you might want to do is at some stage you might want to start making straight lines in amongst all these curves. Same difference. If I take this handle here, the one that was the tailing end one, so that's influencing the next direction, and instead of having it actually make a curve, I can make it back into a straight. If I press and hold Alt and drag the handle so that it lies flat along where the path is going to go. Okay, and then with the pen tool, if I just click once, you see it returns back to being a straight line again. Because it's not pulling at any kind of angle, it's staying on the line of the path. I can put straight lines in again. And there you go, gives you a level of control over your handles that perhaps you would never have had before. So it's that Alt key that's the important part. Okay, now looking at a couple more things with the pen tool. Still using the pen tool, it's still the main tool for for making paths. If I take the selection tool here and just click away, that would close the path. Although I haven't actually drawn a path from this anchor point here down to this anchor point here, the path itself would automatically close. It just there wouldn't be any kind of stroke or anything indicated across that space. What I'd like to do is, let's imagine that's happened in error. The phone rang, I had to go and answer it. When I came back, forgotten what I was doing and broke my path. Whatever happens, I'm sure it's happened to you 100 times. We need to reopen the path so I can carry on adding more design elements to this shape, whatever this shape actually is turning into. If I pick up the pen tool again and go somewhere else and start clicking, then yes, it would make a new path. They wouldn't join together. There would be two separate paths, and if I picked one up and moved it, the other one could potentially move as well, unless I used some kind of grouping or maybe the Unite or something Pathfinder. Instead, let me just zoom in on this if I can. Good, it was switched on. When I take the pen tool over an anchor point, watch what happens. You'll see there that next to the pen tool, it turns into a little 45-degree line. Instead of having a cross, which is where you can put another anchor point, it recognizes that there's a point there already and says, oh, okay. And when I click on it, nothing much seems to happen, but it does select that anchor point. That anchor becomes alive, it lights up, and I don't know if you can see at this view, but along the path there are blue lines have appeared all over the place to say, oh, the path is reignited. And what it means now is I can continue to go further on and draw other shapes. I haven't got a curve here because I didn't pull, I just clicked. So it's gone from a straight line back into a curve. But there we go. It gives us this option to continue making shapes on from that path. What I'll do is I'll get it a little bit closer to this other path here. That's just the other anchor point. So if I take that over there, let's see what happens if I go up here. Just adding some interesting elements so I can get close up to the end there. So there we go, a little bit more abstract down at the bottom. Quite like that. Now, another method for being able to continue to edit your paths and work with your paths is not to use the pen tool at all, at least not at this stage, but instead to use this tool here, which is called the Direct Selection tool. You see it's got more of a white colouring compared to the black of the selection tool. Or you can press A, unless you're in type mode obviously, because then you'll get the letter A. So if I pick up this Direct Selection tool, now what the Direct Selection tool allows me to do that the Selection tool doesn't, is it allows me to select individual elements of a path. So basically individual anchor points or possibly even the handles, as you'll see in a second. Now when you first click on the Direct Selection tool, it's very often the case that the whole path is still selected. You may have had it selected with the black selection tool, and then you switch over to the Direct Selection tool, but all that's happened is that the Direct Selection tool has everything selected. So when you try and move one thing or do one thing to one part of your path, the whole path still moves, and that can be confusing. So what I always say to people to do is just make sure you don't have hold of anything by taking the Direct Selection tool and just clicking somewhere where there's nothing to be clicked. And if there was anything picked up, that's it now, put down basically. Now I'm just going to zoom in again so that this makes a little bit more sense, or certainly easier to see. Now here I have an anchor point at the start of this path I began to draw, and an anchor point at the end of the path that I've just drawn. What I'd like to do, see how they both come to life with the Direct Selection tool? Makes them visible. If I select one of these anchor points, it's very hard to see at this sort of colour range and size, but it turns blue. All the other anchor points are still white with a blue box round about them, almost like a white fill and a blue path or a blue stroke. But the one that's selected remains blue. Now if I then go down to the other anchor point, and if I press and hold Shift and I click on that anchor point as well, I'm able to select both anchor points at the same time. Now this gives me the option to join them. I can, rather than try and draw something to join these two together, I can ask InDesign to do it for me, so that they just come to life and path joins in between them, and then we can mess around with it some more. Another sometimes faster option, really depends on your drawing, is if I deselect them again, just by clicking away from them. If I draw what's called a marquee, which is basically I've taken the Direct Selection tool and I'm clicking and drawing a rectangle shape over both points. When I release that, anything that's selectable inside that rectangle becomes selected. In this case, it's the 2 points. And I can go up to, I can use the menu, or I can use a keyboard shortcut. Now, if I'm going to use the menu, then all I need to do is go up to Object, go down to where it says Path here, and choose Join, or the keyboard shortcut for this, on a Mac anyway, is Command J. If you're using a PC, that'll be Control J for Join, and it just puts a straight path in between the two, ready to go. Now, if I want them to turn into a curve, or rather this line to turn into a curved line, then I'll have to convert that into an anchor point, or two anchor points that have curved paths rather than straight paths, like you can see. So that's when I can go and choose the Convert Anchor Point tool as an actual tool, rather than just convert the pen tool by using the Alt key. Now if I take this and I come up to that anchor point there, first one, and I click and drag, I get some handles. Now what it's going to do is it's going to ruin the nice simple round path that I made here on this side, you'll see there, but it's making them curve over here. I'm not bothered by that. That's absolutely fine, because that gives me the option of fixing it all later on. So just drag and it creates one curve. And I'll do the same down here. I'll click and I'll drag to create the other curve. If you drag in the wrong direction, you'll get a kind of a loop, or sometimes it looks like a bit of a knot, like that. It's absolutely fine. Just unwind. Like your granny's knitting, just unwind that and get it going the direction that you actually want. Okay, now this is where things can get a little bit interesting, because if I then take, say, that handle, I can move it on its own. As you know, the Convert Anchor Point tool will do that. And if I take this handle, I can also grab it and move it on its own. Or, oh wait, his partner has disappeared. Oh no, this is disastrous. However, it's not such a disaster once you realise that the Convert Anchor Point tool is really only supposed to be used once. It's only supposed to either generate handles or not generate handles. It's not meant to be a tool that you keep going back to, because now this is actually quite a destructive tool. If I take that Convert Anchor Point tool and try and click on any of these anchor points to maybe reignite the handles that were sticking out, it won't do that. What it will do is it will convert the anchor point. So from now on, every time I use this tool, it thinks I'm either wanting to change my mind from having a curved anchor point to a straight anchor point, and it becomes a little bit frustrating. Now it is useful for taking one handle, and if you think of it as snapping that handle so that it's broken it at this point here, so it's two separate parts, a bit like a twig, snapped it in half. What to use instead of that, once you've made your curves, is just rely completely on the direct selection tool. Because with the direct selection tool, when you click on an anchor point to select it, it doesn't try and convert it, it merely activates it so that you can actually do something with it. So there's the handle that I need to control to get this curve back. And here's the handle that I need to control for this half of this curve. So if I take this handle and I'm just going to drag it back down on my grid that I made to the position it was in before, and there's my curve returns. I'll do the same on this handle here, maybe just make that a little bit more curved that way, and then with these handles I can pretty much do anything I like. I can stretch them out, put them into any shape that I want, and when I zoom out, there's my interesting, if not unusual, shape with the handles doing whatever it is I want them to do. Okay, so continuing our theme of working with paths in Creative Suite 5, this time we're moving over to InDesign, and we're going to have a look at something we can do with paths in InDesign. Again, that's just a little bit different. And it lets you move away from this idea of always having rectangular images, which is a bit of a bugbear of mine, that people often just put rectangular images in because that's the shape of the image, rather than putting in the parts of the image that are actually interesting and maybe making it part of the design of the page. Now here you can see I've already placed a photograph of this building onto just an A4 piece of paper in or an A4 document in InDesign, and it's got a rectangular shape. You can see that there's this grey sky, and there's a little bit of a street down at the bottom, some cars, some trees, the odd sign, and there's this old brick building with some interesting roof attachments on there as well. What I'm interested in really here is the actual building, and maybe some of the elements down at the bottom on the right hand side, maybe like the pavement, the curb, but not the street, not the cars, not the trees in the background, and definitely not the grey sky. So, little trick for you. When you're working in InDesign and you've placed a picture, obviously when you click on the picture you've got the bounding box that goes around the picture, and if I was to take the direct selection tool and click on the photograph, it gives me the bounding box of the actual picture itself inside there that's been placed. That's all well and good for scaling and positioning and things like that, but neither of them will give you this idea of cropping. the image down to the part that you actually want. There is, however, a trick that allows you to bring up the clipping path that comes with the box that's holding on to the photograph. There is a clipping path around the photo. It's just at the moment in InDesign by default, it's exactly the same size as the actual photograph itself. However, if you take the ordinary selection tool, your black selection tool, and you have the photograph selected so you can see the bounding box anchor points and the yellow corner options tool, without doing anything else, just swap the tool from the selection tool to the direct selection tool. And notice how that has now changed. I can still see a blue line around the outside of the box, but it's not the placeholder for that photograph anymore. Nor is it the brown edge of the actual photograph itself. Instead, I'm seeing 4 anchor points. I'll scroll down a little bit so you can see that. 4 anchor points, one at each corner, and these little blue paths in between them. This is the clipping mask for the photograph. Now at the moment, because I've switched to the direct selection tool from having the photograph selected, all 4 anchor points are active at the same time. You see they're all blue. If I was to click away just for a second over here, where there's nothing to select, and then go back and hover over those anchor points, you'll see that the direct selection tool can still see them. And by clicking, it'll reactivate just one. Now, if I pick that point up and move it, I'm able to change the shape of the box that holds on to the photograph. And I can do that from each point, pick each point up, and just place them where I'd like them to be. Another one there, I'll pull it down. Now I'm not sure what to do with this roof section. I think at the moment I'll probably just say, let's see if we can't get rid of it. And there we go. Completely different shape for the photograph. If I switch back to my selection tool, the bounding box, when I click on the photograph, is still the same. It goes in a rectangular shape. It's smaller right enough, but it's still the same. And if I click on the direct selection tool and go back and click on the photograph, the brown bounding box for the original photograph is again still the same because the photograph itself hasn't been affected. It's just the clipping path inside the placeholder that's been affected. Now, I'm not quite finished editing the shape of that yet because it's not really doing what I want it to do yet. It's interesting, but it could be better. So I'll go back to my selection tool, click on the bounding box again to bring that up, and then switch again to the direct selection tool so that I can then see that blue path with its 4 anchor points. Now, in order to get a more detailed line around about this building, it's going to need more anchor points, and that's where the pen tool comes in. If I take, not the pen tool, but the add anchor point tool, which is the next one down in the pen tool category, and I bring that over to this blue path, and anywhere I can see that I need a couple more anchor points here and there, I'll just bring that tool, hover it over that blue path, and get the position of it just right. I'm not sure. There we go, got one there. I don't know why I'm struggling to get one here. There we go, managed the second time. And I'll just put a few anchor points in there, and it's going to be a bit busier down here, so I think I'll put a couple down here to let me get round that curb, and maybe I could do one up on the roof here. We'll see. I can always add more if necessary. Now again, the direct selection tool, if I go in and just make sure that I'm selecting these one at a time, I can pull them in and position them, like this one here, goes around this sign. It sticks out because that's quite a nice little architectural feature. I'll keep that. The roof, I noticed there's a little bit of a kick in the roof there that could be quite interesting to keep. And then down here, where I made these other ones, I can pull that into the curb, bring that one in tight to the curb as well, and just try and bring in that a little bit closer to the shape of the curb. Now again, if I still feel I don't have quite enough, then I can go back and I can keep adding more anchor points using that add anchor point tool. There's one should go in about there, and I think one should go in about there. And with the direct selection tool, I can keep coming back to them, picking them up as individuals, and just manipulating them. And the nice thing about it is it does show you that little ghost preview of the photograph, so you do get an idea of where you're looking for, what you're looking to do, and that makes a completely different shape around about the photo. I haven't actually changed the photo at all. I didn't have to go into Photoshop and make a mask or any such thing. It's still a rectangular photo. It's just I've changed the bounding box, the clipping path inside the bounding box, to make that into something a little bit more interesting. If I just zoom out a little bit so I can see the whole page, and if I add a text box in now, maybe just across that entire margin, like so, and just to see what it looks like, I'll fill that with placeholder text. So up to the type menu, fill with placeholder text, in it goes. Now obviously I can't read the text where the building is, so I'll just go back to my selection tool, click on the building. Notice I can click on it where it hits the edge of the page. And really I should have some bleed there, but it's just a practice, so I'll forgive myself that one. And go to the text wrap menu, which if you don't have that on, go up to window, there's text wrap there, just switch it on. Now it never comes open docked, it always floats around here. So I like to dock mine over here in the group. Now I'm just going to choose this third option, not wrap around the bounding blocks, because obviously that's still rectangular, but the third option, wrap around the object shape, and it sees the clipping path and says okay, go around that, and I'll maybe just give it a little bit of padding just to tidy that up a little bit. Press W to see what that looks like as a print, and there you go, completely different setup. Might actually look nice with a couple of columns. Yeah, there you go. That's a much more interesting way of presenting that photograph with the text rather than working with rectangles. So again, that's the paths, and make a lot more sense to use. The other thing you can do, of course, if you're remembering back what we did with our Illustrator section, is that when you have these points active, I did have them active there, I've just switched them off for some reason, the Convert Anchor Point tool will do exactly the same thing here as it does in Illustrator. So when they've got these anchor points here, when I go over one, I can click and drag to turn it into more of a curved shape if that's appropriate. Now I would suggest for this photograph it's possibly not, maybe down here at the curb perhaps. It might make a bit more sense. But all in all, I would probably stay with the angles for that particular photo. But it just shows you how that can still be done. And just as with Illustrator, if you want to go in and maybe make one handle go in one direction, handle go in the other, you use exactly the same workflow. It's the same thing, the same tools. Direct selection tool. To move the handles, the Convert Anchor Point tool will snap the handles so that you can then move them independently of each other using the direct selection tool. No change at all. Now continuing the theme, let's have a look at what we could have done with that photograph in Photoshop instead. So I'll leave the document here like this, and I'll just hop over to Photoshop, and I'll open up the same photograph. There it is, to find it. Okay, so there's the same photograph in Photoshop. Now normally, if you were looking to make something transparent in Photoshop, you would immediately think mask. But one of the problems with masks, especially if you're using InDesign, is that masks are, well, for one thing, they're not destructive because they can be removed. They're non-destructive, but they do change the photograph for any use. So every time you go into the Photoshop and you want to use this photograph, if it's got a mask, then that mask will be there, and if you print it, you'll have no sky, etc. Now, it might be, because this is quite a nice picture, that you need this picture for something else, and you don't need it with a mask. You want to have the sky and the cars and the street and everything else, in which case you would remove the mask. Problem there is though, because it's a linked element to your, or a linked picture in your InDesign document, if you were then to print your InDesign document, just for instance, you would have you'd go back to being a rectangle in InDesign, which would be no use whatsoever. So instead, we can use a completely different method of getting rid of the background so that InDesign can see it, but Photoshop will essentially ignore the fact that you've asked the background to go, and that's by using a clipping path instead. Now, if I have a look at my panels in Photoshop and I go to paths, you see there's a clipping path that I made earlier there called path 1. I'm going to show you how I made this. In the actually no, go back to the layers. Now, one of the advantages to using Photoshop for this is the fact that it has such nice selection tools. Now, if I was to go in and just use, let's say, the quick selection tool on the sky, I'll just make that a little bit larger. So I'll start selecting bits of sky around there. There's most of it selected already. Let's go in and add the odd little element down here, come down the cars and the street down here. Okay, it's not bad, it's not perfect. Now, what I often find when you're using something like the quick selection tool is it very often gets a bit slapdash when you're making an initial selection. However, if you then go and refine it by removing from the selection, it seems to work a little bit better. I don't know the science behind it, but it does. So I'm going to press Alt, and notice that my tool changes, when I press Alt, changes to have a little minus, which is removing from the selection rather than adding. So I'm still using the quick selection tool, pressing minus, and I'll just go along that curb, and you see how for some reason it couldn't quite work out what to do with the curb earlier, but now it's doing a much better job. And if I had all day, I would spend all day on this, but I don't, so I won't. What else was a problem? I suppose that section there, you could say that should really be part of what I'm using. Maybe I'll take a bit of that ground there. Actually, I might even take the street sign. Quite like that street sign. Gives me something vertical there that's interesting to look at. And there's a wee sign sticking out. I don't know what it says from here. Little business sign. I'll take a bit of that as well. So I'm just making some fine changes to that. Now up here, there's one or two little sections on the roof. I don't want this thing here, so I'll just try and remove some of that. Now, you could spend a lot of time using the different refine elements in Photoshop to try and get that to tidy up and be nice and neat, etc. And I've already spent more time on it than I meant to, just trying to get that. But you know what it's like when you're in Photoshop, you do tend to start getting a bit too pernickety. So it's made a selection. Of course, the selection is of the sky, which is not what I want. I want the rest. I want everything but the sky and the ground, etc. So the first thing to do is go up to select and inverse that selection so that it's the building that becomes the thing that's selected. Now, if I go to the Paths panel, now in Photoshop, it does use paths, not extensively, and in most cases when you use anything that involves a path, at some stage that will need to be rasterized into a bitmap image of some description. However, it does hold paths and is happy to keep them. And when you have them, other applications such as InDesign recognize them instantly. So in the Paths panel, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the selection I've made and actually convert it into a path. So rather than using the pen tool to go around and make all these different shapes, which as you can see is very doable, as we've looked before, but takes a little bit longer. Instead, you can use Photoshop's really intelligent selection tools and use that to make a path instead. Now the trick is to use this little button here, which allows you to make a thing called a working path from your selection. When I click on it, this thing called a work path appears, and you can see there, if you look at the general outline of the path, it's the selection that I just made. Now, a work path only works in Photoshop. It's not something that InDesign will recognize. So we'll have to convert it into something InDesign is happy with. And all you have to do there is double click on it, on its name, and give it a name, path 2. Let's call it building close, so we know it's a close cut of the building. There we go, building close. Simple as that. Now, it hasn't done anything at all to the Photoshop image. You might notice that when I have it selected, there's a very faint outline of a path around about the building, but it hasn't done anything to actually get rid of any of those elements of the photograph. Path 1 right now is set as a clipping path. The reason I know this is that the text is outline. I'm going to change that so the building close becomes the clipping path. And I can do that by going into the flyout menu in the Paths panel up here, and in there I just choose clipping path. And then Photoshop asks me which of the two paths do I want to use as a clipping path. I'll choose building close and then click OK. Now all I have to do is save the document. So I'm just gonna save it over top of itself. And notice it's a JPEG. If I had masked this, I'd have to save it as something that could contain that mask, something that would have the transparency. So a PNG or a Targa or a TIFF or a GIF, or even possibly a Photoshop file, which would then all of which would have bulked up the size because it had that transparency. With this, it's staying a JPEG. And the only extra information that's on there is the small amount of information that is contained inside that path, which is really just some anchor points and the lines between them. So not a great deal at all. So I'll save it as that JPEG. And then if I come back into InDesign, and I'm just going to get a new document inside InDesign. Let's take an ordinary print document, and I'll bring up the place menu, and I'll choose that same stone wall. Now, often when people are placing things from InDesign into InDesign, they don't use this show import options, and it's really not actually necessary for what we're going to do here because the default is for that Photoshop path to be recognized. But I'm going to switch it on so that you can see the options. And if I click open, it comes up and it says, do you want to apply the Photoshop clipping path? And if I say yes, you'll see there that it takes on a completely different shape. When I click OK and pop the image in, there is the Photoshop path that we just created going round about our building. And again, if I take my text tool like I did earlier, and I just draw a text box over that, and I'll fill it with placeholder text. It goes over, and we'll go back to that text strap we were talking about, and I'll go round the shape. And this time, if you look inside, so I've chosen the third option again, the wraparound object shape. And if you look at the options, the contour options, it says same as clipping. It always will, unless you change it. In there, you could choose Photoshop path, but at the moment, it's exactly the same thing. But an interesting thing does happen, because remember, in Photoshop there were two paths. If I choose Photoshop path, suddenly it goes, well, which one? Path 1 or building close? So even in Photoshop, if you wanted to, you could go in and make umpteen different paths inside Photoshop. And each time, when you choose a different path to clip around, you give yourself some options on the text strap. If you look down at the bottom here, on the original path 1, there was a much straighter edge that included some of the car, maybe a bit of tree in that Photoshop path called path 1. When I changed to my path, the building close, I didn't have that. So that text then hugs that space a lot tighter. And it's just a really nice way of giving yourself some options in Photoshop to be able to do different things with your images and how they interact with text. And it's a little bit faster as well than going in with the pen tool in InDesign and using curves and what have you. Now, if you look back at the first exercise that I did there, the making curves, what I've done is I've created a little sheet of almost like little cards that if you want to download them, you can use them as a guide. So if you're ever sitting with a loose end looking to do something with the paths, it gives you good experience, good practice in making shapes. And the link for that is here. So if you take note of that link, it'll start to download a PDF, and the PDF is you can print off, or you can keep it on the screen, cut it up into small parts if you want, because it's I've divided it up into like little cards, little flash cards, or you can just keep it as one sheet. But it'll give you some things that you can do to practice. I'll give you a quick look at what it looks like. I think it's in here. No, it's not in there. No, it's in there, but not as a PDF. I'd have to find my PDF. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Here on my desktop. There. I'll just bring up some example. So there's a little stem here, and see how we've got this key that the red shows you the direction to pull the handle. So that one first, and then that one, and then the yellow indicates where to move handles to by holding Alt, and then the little rectangle, the square here, is the anchor points where to actually click. So there's a more complex leaf there, so petal shape here. If you really want to challenge yourself, there's a pear with a bite taken out of it. You can always have a go at that one. And just to get a little reminder of what using the Alt button does, or the Alt key does, rather than relying on the handles, where every curve has to go in the opposite direction of the previous curve because of that handle that's trailing. Okay, so thank you very much for listening.